that ability to look yourself in the mirror at the end of any day and know that what you've given, what you've shown up to in your life is authentic, that is worth so much.
Welcome, Jennie, to the Unleash the Knowledge podcast, Everyday Extraordinary, where it's my job to push the message that we all have extraordinary capabilities within us that I believe simply need to be channeled and activated. I do this by having amazing conversations with everyday extraordinary people, just like yourself. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Owen. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, we've been connected for a bit now, and you're the author of Spark Change, that I'll get on this video screen right here. It came out in September 2020, a couple months into the pandemic. We'll get into the process of how that's been with writing the book, publishing the book, and then marketing the book during this global pandemic. But even more so, the book is perfect for what we just went through. It asks, or it shares 108 provocative questions for spiritual evolution, and it touches on topics like values, beliefs, mastery, purpose, and a few others that we'll get into as well. But just want to also congratulate you for winning the Nautilus Award recently. That was one of your recent accomplishments, along with a couple other award-winning, certificates or prizes that you've been able to achieve with this book. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the Nautilus was a big one. So very proud of that.
Awesome. It's always great to see the hard work pay off and people to notice your work, of course. And I'm sure you're getting screenshots and posts left and right of people that have found your book without you even knowing, and having them, of course, be impacted by your work.
It's always gratifying to hear from readers. That's actually the best part of being an author.
I love it. That's awesome. I will experience that one day. Hopefully sooner than later is the plan, but we'll cross that bridge soon. So I'd love to kick it off with, and I do this with a lot of the people I interview, it's one thing for me to give an introduction of who you are, but I'd love to have you explain who you are in your own words, and quickly maybe, what you do for a living and what how that kind of has come about in your life.
Sure. Well, I'm an evolving human, surfer here in Hawaii, and big animal lover. So that's kind of personal. I'm married with a 22-year-old about to graduate from college. But professionally, I'm the author of 3 books. Spark Change is my most recent one. I also was the author of True Yoga and Breathing Love. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been a coach and a yoga therapist. So prior to that, owned a yoga studio, and then got into more of the counseling coaching aspect of using yoga philosophy to help people find balance and peace and joy in their lives. And so it's been a very gratifying last couple of decades, and I hope to keep going a couple more. And the books are a reflection of my coaching practice as well, and really trying to bring that philosophy and understanding of who we are as evolving humans to more and more people.
Well, that's incredible to hear. And definitely, again, your work is definitely shining, I'm sure, more today than ever before, at least in my lifetime, knowing that the past 12 to 18 months have been pretty hectic for us all, and that we will, hopefully get through this as one, and I'm sure we will. And the work you've done is going to be impactful as well. So the next question I do have is, you are a 3-time author, and I'd love to get your take on what was the process like publishing and promoting your book in general, but also during the pandemic specifically. And I asked this in the sense that you've done 2 books already. So how is this different? What did you do differently, knowing from the past experiences? And maybe if you could touch upon, 2 or 3 things that maybe you would have done differently even the 3rd time around with this book.
I definitely have learned something with each book. I've been traditionally published with all 3. So that was really important to me. I did not want to self-publish. I wanted to have a traditional publisher experience. And I've been published with 2 different ones, Llewellyn for the first 2 and Sounds True for Spark Change. Definitely one thing I wasn't aware of going in is how much of the marketing work falls to the author. And particularly, as you said, during a pandemic when people's focus was really elsewhere, it was challenging to try to market a book on self-inquiry and personal introspection when everybody is looking out at the world, and during a difficult election year as well, when there was just so much focus on the news and what was happening externally. So I think one of the hardest things about being an author these days is this dual career that we have to have. It's not enough that we write the book. Even with traditional publishers, we are also responsible for so much of the marketing. And I know for me, that's not my aptitude. It's not my interest. It's been really challenging. So that's something I've learned. I'm not sure if I hit all the questions that you asked in that last round, but
No, that was great. So I guess one last question with to still stay on this kind of topic, because then we're going to transition. Um, are there things you would have done differently, or next book you write, if there is a next book, global pandemic aside, even, well, actually, knowing that the world has changed, what would be your approach now, or some tidbits maybe you can share to an author that's thinking about writing a book?
well, I'm certainly no expert on the marketing side of things, and it's something I'm continuing to figure out as I go along. I think just from a personal standpoint, what I would do differently is not exhaust myself in the efforts like I did on this last round. And so I do hope that I will have another book. I have a proposal out there right now, but my intention with that next one is to stay really true to myself in terms of what feels organically me in terms of the
Mhm.
marketing, and just stick with that, because you can truly burn yourself out trying to do everything that there is to do and that everything that people tell you that you should do. um, it's a lot.
Definitely. And you hit the nail on the head in terms of it's a full-time job in itself. And obviously, there's a select few of authors that are full-time authors, but even with writing books, they're also, speaking and doing a lot of other things for their brand. So, yeah, it takes a lot. And there's definitely resources out there for people to help you. But even with all that, it, a lot of it falls on the author. So it's definitely something, I mean, like advice I would take myself would be just be prepared for the process of a full on gig of getting your book out. So that's incredible. So now about the book, Spark Change. Again, 108 provocative questions for spiritual evolution. Is there a number one takeaway that you're hoping readers to obtain after reading your book?
The overall takeaway is how important the practice of self-reflection is. So I think a lot of people look outward for validation. They look outward and point at problems. And I'm very big on personal accountability and looking inward, both for the solutions and for not well, just for working our, working our inner process and looking at how we stand in relationship to the problems that are occurring in the world, in our lives, et cetera. And I don't feel that we grow as humans until we're willing to do that. So I'm just
Mhm.
really big on self-reflection and personal accountability. And I think as people embrace that practice, they find such greater fulfillment, because it's kind of a never ending quest when we're looking for fulfillment from the external world and from other people. I mean, it's the bane of social media, right? It's like how many likes and follows and how many people are praising me today, and then your self-worth goes up and down based on that. But when we really come home to ourselves and can own our inner experience, that's such a more powerful place to stand in our lives. So I just want people to really embrace that practice.
Absolutely. And yeah, now more than ever with social media and with so many ways to kind of express yourself, whether it's your true persona or a false persona, a lot of people are not spending time with self-reflection and self-awareness. And me myself, I've uh, finally, I guess, took a deep dive when COVID first hit in March, all the way through that summer, to do so, and it was massive. It was there was breakthroughs. It was pivotal, and I mean, I definitely encourage others to do so as well. So, great insight there for sure, and it's something that is always going to need. Not only are people going to have to, like you said, keep working on it. It's a never ending journey, but now more than ever, today's world with the technology and with, I mean, interacting with people without having to be in person, like we're doing right now. I think all those types of exercises and asking all these questions is super, super important.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've been practicing, or I mean, you've been pursuing yoga for the better part of the last 20 years, if not more. Um, and that's of course to be a yoga instructor, I would say is not the conventional path for someone coming out of college. They're not working a 9 to 5, or they're not a so-called cog in the machine, just kind of a number. So I'd consider you a creative, an artist in that sense. So I'd love to hear your insight, and maybe you can date back to when you were coming out of college or high school and how you kind of formulated this career for yourself. What kind of wisdom or advice you can share with someone who's not looking to run into a corporation and has a skill or has a passion behind that or within them that is a creative art. How do they pursue it? How do they get started? How do they earn a living? How do they make it their lives?
It really all kind of circles back to the same thing, which is being true to yourself. So the beautiful thing about our world today is there are so many more opportunities for creative people. And I really consider everyone to be a creative person in their own particular way. It's not just the traditional arts like painting or writing or whatever. Everyone has a way of being creative in the world. And so if you're wanting to make a profession out of that, fortunately, there are a lot more opportunities to do so with so many businesses on the internet. But I think to be sustainable and kind of I've been thinking about this in terms of even my son graduated from college, and he's a creative individual. He's looking at how he can make his way in the world, and we have a lot of talks about just truly being your authentic self and not trying to be everything to everyone, but really niching in to what is most important. And one of the chapters in Spark Change, it has to do with values, and I find that that's really, really important for people to define for themselves what their highest values are, because when our lives are aligned with our highest values, regardless of what we're doing or how much money we're making or how much outer success we achieve, or the ultimate, how many followers we have on Instagram, we're still going to feel content at the end of the day. And there is so much pressure on authors, certainly, in terms of the marketing part of the industry, to have those numbers, and it can get really soul sucking to constantly be chasing that. And so we have to have that foundation, that inner foundation of a connection to our true self and what's most important to us, what our highest values are, and then kind of however that expresses itself and at whatever level, practicing non-attachment to it looking a certain way. And but then you can still also feel good about yourself at the end of the day, because you're really doing something that is meaningful to you.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, a lot of great points you mentioned there. And it reminds me of something I believe I learned through Robin Sharma, who I'm a big fan of. And he's, more or less in your space, which I'm sure you like him too. He talked about, there was a story of a Wall Street convention or something, or a Wall Street dinner, and some guy was worth tons of money. He was on the stage speaking, and his buddy next to him says, "Man, like this guy seems to have it all, right? Like, look at him, he's the man." And then the guy next to him, who could have been Robin if he was speaking about himself, he said, "You know what? But there's one thing that I have that he doesn't have, and it's the fact of knowing that I have enough, or when is enough." And that's more so with my generation and with social media and the dopamine hits, the instant gratification. Uh, that's what we all strive for. Is unfortunately a recipe for disaster, and it's gonna, whether it has shown up in people's lives today, or whether it has today or not, it's going to, sooner or later. And I try to throw myself into a lot of like specifically long-term investing in finance to understand the delay and gratification aspect and how you can be wealthy at some point in your life, but just not today. And there's a time and place for everything. So I just want to include that little story because I always remind myself of that. That's super, really just a moving thing to think of, something to think about in terms of, maybe you see these people do really well on Instagram, whether it's true or not, you might have peace of mind and they might not. So at the end of the day, I think that's the most valuable thing.
There's also so much falsity on social media, people buying followers. A lot of what we see is not actually true or real. So that ability to look yourself in the mirror at the end of any day and know that what you've given, what you've shown up to in your life is authentic, that is worth so much. It really, really is. And it's what creates peace of mind over time. And I think also for your generation, Owen, like, we have seen these instant successes, these few breakout people, but really they are such a small percentage of the general
Yes.
population. And so, young people are comparing themselves to these YouTube icons or whatever, but it's just not the way that life really works. Most things that are valuable take a tremendous amount of work and persistence and perseverance and time of practice. I hear people all the time say, "Oh, I can't meditate. I'm too restless." I was like, "Yeah, you and every single other person on the planet who has ever tried to meditate, and myself included. Like, it's just the way it is. It takes practice. So anything worthwhile takes time and practice. And we just have to kind of wrap our heads around that."
Yeah, and that's a good point about seeing the few folks that look like they just woke up the next day and they were massively successful. And even to that point, like someone I think about, is Mark Zuckerberg, because I'm a big entrepreneurship startup guy. I love learning about it. I read about it. I'm involved in, a couple of those. So I always think like, oh man, it would be great to be Mark Zuckerberg. But then you think about it. One, okay, he's an anomaly for sure, but also he's been learning. He's been in action since like 15. Maybe he broke out at 22 or 18 or whenever he did, but he's been doing this since 13. And then even the YouTube creators and the TikTok people, which is a whole nother discussion. But some of the TikTokers that have done well were on Vine previously. So they've also been working on their craft for X amount of years. And of course, I mean, I think when anyone becomes successful, they look at them and they're like, "Oh, he's lucky. He just woke up like that." But you know, not to you know bring the spotlight on myself, but even if ever one day something happens with me, they're gonna look back and be like, "This guy's been doing this since X amount of years. He's built this brand or whatever that may be." So yeah, to really zoom out is very important, and most people won't. And it seems to be obviously the people that make those quick judgments are small minded, more or less, and they're all, they're the people that probably won't experience that type of success because they don't want to put that work in. So all good points there. But my next question has already kind of been answered, but I'm curious if you have another piece of advice that you can shed light on. But pretty much to the 22-year-old self, maybe someone that just graduated college, any advice or tips that you've learned in your life, throughout maybe the last year or even just your whole lifetime that you can impart on this person? I'm sure it's some advice towards your son as well that you've been giving him.
Yeah, well, it's the advice I give him a lot is to relax.
Mm,
Because, it's funny. I think there's kind of two kinds of humans. There are the ones who are just kind of cruising and not really motivated and probably need a fire lit under them. And then there are the ones who are highly driven, like my son, like yourself, like myself. And we need to learn to also have some levity, learn to keep relaxation, keep a balance, a personal balance between work and life, and remember that there is more to life than just being success in business or earning a certain number of dollars in the bank, and that life is hopefully long and we can pace ourselves, and it doesn't all have to happen overnight. Even though we all love instant gratification, we don't have to always be going for that, and that we can stop and smell the roses. And literally that phrase, I take a walk every morning, and I live in Hawaii, so we have tons of flowers that are very fragrant, and I make it a point to literally stop and smell the plumeria and the
mm.
puakinikini and the gardenia. And so not just the roses, but it's really important to stay present and grounded in your moment, because you don't get this moment back. And if you're always looking at the future and where you're headed and what you've got to achieve and what's next, then you miss so many moments. So I think that more than anything, as a person who's a couple generations up, is, yeah, just relax.
Yeah, it's great advice again. And when you were saying that, because I looked at it today, but And not to really connect everything to social media, but Snapchat has this way of saving your Snapchats from years ago. So I saw one from college 3, 4 years ago. And of course I missed those days. And but then it, like you just said, like, when I was there, I probably could have done a better job of being like in my place, like, wow, this is an amazing experience. I'm not gonna be able to experience this again, but like let me take this in. And I definitely try to I definitely try to push for a conscious effort of being present everywhere I am. I've had thoughts of getting it. I don't have a tattoo, but I've had thoughts of, friends of mine tell me I'm the guy apparently that they're surprised that he doesn't have two sleeves of tattoos for whatever that means. But that was probably high school me, who's a 180-degree different person. But I've always had a thought to get a tattoo saying, be present where your feet are. And
Nice.
and I like kind of picked that up on my own. I don't think anyone else has really like coined that phrase, or maybe they have, but it wasn't really something I could call upon that someone said it. But yeah, I think it's super powerful. Wherever your feet are, that's where your head should be. And usually those two things on the same body are in completely different lands. So maybe I'll get the tattoo. Maybe it would just be a reminder in my mental space. But I think that's great advice, because a lot of people
That,
need that, no
that
matter
would be
what
a
age you are.
good tattoo.
Yeah. So there's 108 questions in this book. And like I mentioned, it talks upon mastery and beliefs and values. You break it up into, I think, 6 or 7 kind of larger chapters with a bunch of questions inside each of them. So the $1 million question that I want to ask, is there a most important question in this book that everyone should be asking themselves, once? Is it the most important, or maybe every single day they should be asking?
Yeah. Um, well, there's 12 themes or 12 chapters in the book
Okay.
and 9 questions in each one. And so these are questions that I know I return to over and over again. People will find different answers at different times in their lives. So I feel like it's always important to be asking questions of ourselves. And this is kind of like a little koan, but I would say the most important question to ask is, what's the most important question I need to answer right now?
Mm,
Because that puts us into that present moment, that being present where your feet are kind of state of mind that you were just talking about. And it's like, well, what is the question that I most need to answer right now? And that can change moment to moment. It can change day to day, month to month, year to year. But that's one that I come back to over and over again because it is so grounding in current time.
I love it. That's a good one. Yeah, it's paradoxal, I guess, to some degree, but or I
Yeah.
mean very much so. So, but that's true, because I have millions of to-do lists that don't get many scratch offs or lines through them. And of course, I used to joke, because I was at basketball before I was building this brand, and we used to joke, you know, Joey, for example, Joey spends more time building a to-do list than actually completing the to-do list, because you're always thinking of new tasks to do, but then you actually have to take action to do so. Um,
Totally.
so that's just, yeah, being grounded and understanding. All right, what is the real true next step, and taking care of that important task is very, very important. That's great. So I'd love to learn, and you speak a bit about this, I think, in the book or something else I've read about you, in terms of your major inspirations growing up. Was it, a family member, another author, a speaker, an athlete, an artist? Can you share kind of who is that? One number one person or a few people that you always called upon for inspiration?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people have those kind of heroes or inspirations, and I don't know that I did really growing up or even in my 20s. I was very eclectic in my studies. I was interested in all kinds of spirituality, world religions, philosophy. I read really widely. I studied with a lot of different teachers. And I would say that it wasn't until about 15 years ago that when I found the spiritual teacher and author Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, which is, a spiritual classic. It's been around for a long time. His work really brought so much of my other studies all together in a package of understanding that it was like huge light bulbs went off in my head. And so from the time that I began reading his work, he has been my biggest inspiration. And one going back a little further though, that really sticks out in my head is a book by Richard Bach called Illusions, and that one
Okay.
blew my mind when I first read it. So it's an old one, but a good one about the nature of consciousness and what we're doing here.
Awesome. I'll have to read that one. I've never heard of it. Um, and I haven't read the autobiography of a yogi yet either, which I'm almost disappointed that I haven't. I've had it for a bit, and I know Steve Jobs has called upon it as well. And Paramahansa Yogananda, I always feel like I'm going to botch the name, and so I really want to, read it and spell it out. But this is not a question that I actually share with you. So, but I'm actually kind of curious to hear your take because I did some research on him afterwards, and I learned that he knew he was ready. He was going to pass one day, and um, he had a speech of some sort, and then he pretty much had a heart attack, I believe. But it was almost as if he knew it was going to happen. He was looking up at the sky, and it happened. But then I learned that his body did not decay or have a smell or odor for 3 weeks. So I'd love to hear. I mean, I really don't know what to make about this. Obviously, it's definitely something spiritually based for sure. But I'd love to hear your take on hearing that.
Yeah. So they write about this. There's a footnote in Autobiography of a Yogi that talks about, it's a statement written by the mortuary person that took his body in, and this whole phenomenon of the lack of decay of the body. But and there's much written about his intentional passing. And I think enlightened masters like him, their consciousness is so complete, so one with all that is, that they do have that precognition of what's happening. They know when their consciousness is going to leave the body, because for them the body is like a coat. The way we would take a
Hmm.
coat off and throw it on the sofa, he took the body off and just threw it on the ground, like, I'm done with that, and moving on to other dimensions. And so yeah, there's lots written about his experience of death. And he's not the only one in his lineage of gurus. His teacher, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and I believe also the one prior to that, Lahiri Mahashai, also were very conscious of their time of passing and had predicted it, and were very intentional as they left the body. But their teachings are anchored in the fact that we are not ultimately these bodies, that these bodies are temporary vessels, that our spirits are here inhabiting and having certain lessons and expressions, but they're not the entirety of who we are.
Right. Yeah, that's a great take on it. And I agree with all that. I also that's more of a reason that everyone, for my understanding, should pursue some sort of impact, whether it's on one person, a child, or a friend, or a nation, whatever scale that may be. Um, Even whether you believe in afterlife or anything of what Paramahansa probably preaches, just for the fact that you have one life, you're on here, you're here right now. Okay. So like understand that you're here right now, be where your feet are, and try to make good, try to do well on others or whatever that may be, even if it means nothing, So to quickly note on this, my best friend from high school, he had a great point. We both were very involved with the church growing up, and then in high school we were part of a organization that helped people get closer to God while also being high school kids. And he took it a step further than me, which I should have, or at least I should have been more cognizant of. And he's doing great today. But I asked him one day, I was like, "Hey man, like, what if all this is just a bunch of fairy dust, and like we don't really know what all this happens in heaven and so forth?" Just to ask that question. And he had a great answer. He was like, "You know what? If it's not, I still lived a great life, and like I still did right by people. So even if I go wherever or I come back as a plant or whatever, I was passionate about something, I loved something, I practiced something, and I did right by others." And I was like, wow. I was like, "Oh, you just stopped me in my tracks." I was like, that's the most powerful message ever. Cause yeah, I mean, it's so true. It's regardless of the beliefs. And I think our country is obviously divided in many different respects, but at the end of the day, it's like, you just do right by others. And whether you believe one thing or someone else believes another, the only thing I think we could all agree on is love and hate, and that black and white kind of mentality of those two sides of the spectrums. or one spectrum, is super powerful. So I think that, I mean, I don't think that message gets pushed enough.
Well, I push it a lot every day,
Yeah.
actually.
Right.
I'm
Well,
always talking about love because, one of the things that Paramahansa Yogananda said that I quote a lot is that love is the harmonizing energy of the universe. And so if we are living a loving life as best that we know how, we're going to experience peace and harmony. If we're living a hateful life, we're going to experience all kinds of chaos and disharmony. So
mhm,
it actually behooves us, even for our own self-interest, to
right.
live a loving life. Because like your friend said, at the end of the day, we don't know what happens after this, but we do know how to achieve greater peace in the here and now through all of the teachings of the ancient philosophers and, beings.
Right. And even at the, just to end this quickly, but right at the base level, we know what it feels like to do good and we know what it feels like to do bad. That's the simplest terms. You feel really great when you do good, or you smile, or you hold the door for somebody, and then you feel really bad when you just cut somebody off on the road and you didn't mean to. You get that guilt just from the human standpoint. And that's something too that I've really just been trying to focus more on, my like true internal feelings
Yeah.
while living life, like while doing things. Like I stub my toe, feeling the stub toe, like, okay, that just happened. I'm a human. Now I feel pain, like that, like all that stuff. It could be a little, I mean, people, to someone who doesn't understand that, it could be like, dude, like, are you on drugs or something? But like that, I think is important. It's a big piece in at least my personal growth to have that type of self-awareness,
We
physically,
do.
internally.
Yeah, you're right. We do need to feel what we're feeling because I think a lot of people get disconnected from their feelings. And then when we disconnect from our own feelings, we can't be empathetic to the person in front of us. And if we lose the empathy between us as humans, that's when a lot more conflict happens. And so we need to stay connected to our present moment feeling experience for sure.
Definitely. So I got my three last questions, kind of fireball questions, or however you want to call it. But you already answered one of them quickly with the book Illusion. But I love to always ask guests, what is a book or a couple books that you always find yourself either rereading or also gifting to others?
If I had to take two books to a desert island, this was another way it was asked to me one time,
Oh,
it
that's
would
good.
definitely be Autobiography of a Yogi and Illusions.
Okay, great. I love that. I might steal that question actually. Um, and then the next question is, do you have a personal mantra yourself that you live by each day that maybe you read or recite in your own mind or out loud each morning?
Yep. Well, I don't necessarily recite it every morning, but this is the one that's fundamental to my life. And I got it from Yogananda, and it's make your love greater than your pain.
Mm, super powerful. I love it. And
All
last
right.
question, what is your definition of extraordinary?
Somebody who is truly their unique self, living from their inner truth, regardless of how they're accepted in the world.
Amazing. Boom. I love it, Jenny. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, you're the
Thank you,
author,
Owen.
yep, of Spark Change. Let's get it focused up. Is there anywhere I could send listeners to learn more about you and follow your work?
Yeah, my website is my name, Jennie Lee, Jennie, Lee, yogatherapy.com. So jennieleeyogatherapy.com. Books are everywhere books are sold. So Spark Change, True Yoga, Breathing Love, they're at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the indie stores. Yeah. So I would love to hear from readers anytime.
Awesome. And we'll stay tuned for your next book too.
Thank you.
All right.